Hello, and welcome to the Psychedelic Skeptic podcast, where nothing is a cure for everything. I'm your host, Ann Metz. Our guest today was alleged to have produced 90% of the world's LSD. William Leonard Pickard is a former drug policy fellow at the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's a research associate in neurobiology at the Harvard Medical School and the deputy director of drug policy analysis program. Actually think I've already messed this up, so maybe we'll go ahead and start it. Start again. Sorry.
Formerly a fellow, this fellow, that fellow.
Former, I know, exactly.
Currently at law. So do you think, yay?
Yay. All right, I'll start this again.
How's the Tesla running from the X?
It's good. I mean, it's running.
You like it?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's great. It's hard to drive another car. Glad I got that in my breakup.
Are you going to tear up the slopes this winter or what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, once they open, right now it's only the bunny slope, so it hasn't really been worth my time.
I can't ski because I got this thing on my leg, but soon.
Soon. Yeah. Good. Great.
Cool.
All right. Take two.
Hit it.
Hello, and welcome to the Psychedelic Skeptic podcast, where nothing is a cure for everything. I'm your host, Ann Metz. Our guest today was alleged to have produced 90% of the world's LSD. William Leonard Pickard is a former drug policy fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, a research associate in neurobiology at Harvard Medical School, and a deputy director of the drug policy analysis program at UCLA. With 2 life sentences without parole, he served 20 years in a maximum security federal prison, but was released in 2020. His book, The Rose of Paracelsus, written in pencil while imprisoned, is published by Synergetic Press, an Italian translation by Mondadori in Milan. His 1996 prediction of the fentanyl epidemic and his recommendations for prevention were confirmed by the Rand Corporation in its seminal volume, The Future of Fentanyl and Other Synthetic Opioids. Currently, he is a senior advisor for the JLS Fund and for the Fireside Project. He's a research affiliate with Harvard Law School, the Petrie Flom Center on Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics program on law and regulation. He currently lives large in Santa Fe, New Mexico, collaborating with Meow Wolf artists, working on new patents, reading broadly, listening to jazz, spending time in nature, and supporting a new generation of psychonauts. He is generally an elegant and graceful man about town. I am so delighted to have you here today, Leonard.
Well, hello, Ann. By the way, listeners, Ann and I were dear friends for some years. And of course, she is naturally effusive. So quite a mouthful, but thank you, Ann. Lovely to be with you today.
Great. Well, I can't think of a more exciting guest to have on the show other than the Acid King. So I hope that we can have a great conversation today about what you're anticipating will happen in the future with psychedelics and maybe what we should think about as we sort of prepare to move into this new paradigm. But just to start really at the beginning, I'm curious about what sparked your initial interest in psychedelics.
Well, according to the government, my first synthesis of LSD was in 1966 at the age of 21 at the Retina Foundation for Experimental Biology in Cambridge. I was a lab tech grinding up beef heart and extracting mitochondria for the biochemist upstairs, the real chemist. And we managed to, according to the government, get in about 10 grams of pure lysergic acid from laboratories in the UK. And of course, things were still illegal at that time. But a long night was spent emulating an antique patent. And by morning, we had this very special substance. We wound up sort of squirting into each other's mouths on Beacon Hill, all 21-year-old hippies. And we felt
allegedly, according to the government, right?
Allegedly, yes. Of course, we thought we were part of a new world. We had new minds. We had a new frame of reference that no humans had ever experienced before, and we were the first. And so we thought with this mind expansion or these phenomena occurring that they were very important because these were the warriors. People were coming back in boxes from Vietnam, dear friends. Thought that we realized the war was necessary to be stopped. We were very anti-materialist. There was a sense of tolerance for others' faiths and creeds and behaviors. There were spontaneous aggregations, 20 or 30,000 people in Golden Gate Park in Berkeley and Marin, Big Sur, just young people coming together, passing joints, hugging each other, speaking of God and love, speaking of phenomena they had experienced on these substances. And so we felt something important was going on with what we thought was an advanced neurochemical, and we were the first to experience it. And that's how it all began.
Wow. Well, it sounds like the early days of psychedelics were quite different than how they're being used now, both particularly in the clinical setting in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s. What do you see are some of the key differences between the psychedelic renaissance now and what it looked like 20 to 30 years ago?
Well, in those days, there was no medicalization effort. There were efforts at Spring Grove, Maryland, to use this class of compounds for treatment of alcoholism with some success. But of course, it was very difficult to get funding. And the Great Depression started with making the entire series of psychedelics illegal, effectively worldwide. At that point, all research was shut off. So the difference really was that in those days, the underground flourished from a million people or so in the Bay Area, throughout the states, throughout the world. You had young people coming to San Francisco, hence the song, "If you're going to San Francisco, wear flowers in your hair." And that spoke of the migration of youth in their early 20s to the Bay Area that had had these experiences and wanted to talk to others about it. Of course, you could not talk to the old folks. That would be anyone over 30, because they had no idea what was going on. It was just our group, 18 to 24-year-old cohort, that was brave enough and experimental enough and free of possessions enough and careers to try something so wild. The underground persisted, of course, from that point forward, so that by this date, there have probably been one estimate is a credible estimate is 2 billion doses have been distributed since 1966 worldwide. Several kilos a month, 30 million doses a month, that sort of thing, or more. From regional laboratories, perhaps 5 or 6 people in the world can make kilogram quantities and let that go out. So the underground has constantly been sort of bubbling along, if you will, for the last 50 years, without much media exposure after the initial rush in the 60s. The thing has been happening very quietly, friends sharing a mushroom, going walking by the sea or in the forest. Then, of course, the oppression continued, still strongly illegal. About 5 years ago, well, earlier than that, the great work really of Roland Griffiths at Hopkins, chair of psychopharmacology, heir of Saul Snyder, one of the early researchers, began to show credibility and establish journals. The Journal of Psychopharmacology, for example, had strongly peer-reviewed by 8 people who came out publicly, in which Roland announced that with proper treatment and proper research protocols using psilocybin, there were significant, not just lightly significant, but immensely significant, favorable changes in one's depression or anxiety. So it was really Roland's work, the late Roland, who just passed away last month, started, in my estimation, the whole thing. Not to disregard a personal friend, Rick Doblin, who preceded me by some years at the Kennedy School of Government. We had the same supervisor. Rick's PhD supervisor was the drug policy analyst, Mark Lyman, distinguished and well-loved fellow that guided Rick initially in terms of relating to federal agencies, DEA, FDA, and what have you, and was instrumental in making early maps go forward. So Mark Lyman, Rick's supervisor and mine, is the unsung hero of the psychedelic movement. Just putting out a note to a dear and late friend.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing a sort of more accurate history of psychedelics over the last couple of decades. One of the things I've been curious to ask you about that I see as a difference between psychedelics now and kind of what we're anticipating as FDA approval goes forward and community-based use becomes more prevalent is really the difference between psychedelics being used in a healthy population, obviously historically, with the exception of alcoholics and not treating alcoholism, psychedelics were for a healthy, well people. And now, and looking to the future, we're using them with people who have psychiatric diagnoses. I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
I absolutely do, and thank you for asking that. It's a question I come across regularly and speak to, that's another difference between the 60s and the current use syndrome, if you will. In the 60s, we realized we had a very powerful material, and we were just kids, and there was an unwritten law. Everybody understood that you didn't want to give these things to a person that had problems. If they were schizzy, detached, perhaps bipolar, depressed, broke up with a girlfriend last night, had a drinking problem, anything other than a normal friend, if you will, that's curious, you didn't give it to them because, one, it would be irresponsible and maybe make them even shakier, precipitate, a psychotic episode in a person that's already a borderline schizzy. And we felt it would simply be inappropriate to do that. Further, you didn't want to sit up all night holding their hand for a day or two and trying to talk them down as they got into very difficult and painful situations. So generally, if a person was awkward or clearly had some problems, we didn't offer that to them.
Okay.
But these days now, the whole thing is turned around. And so the only people that can legally obtain these materials would be those who present with a clinical problem or a near clinical problem to a credentialed therapist saying, I have depression, I have anxiety, and I understand these compounds would be helpful. Would you treat me? It's a complete reversal. And part of that is because of the medical model, which is a very interesting story in itself. FDA will only approve a drug if it's more effective than an existing remedy and is a treatment for a known problem. The FDA will not approve a drug for pleasure, or insight, or wisdom, or compassion, or sense of altruism, or the ineffable effects that are often quoted with these substances, appreciation of the great forest, of the oceans, of the unity of all mankind, womankind. So we're forced to go through the medical model and to add credibility really to the power and promise of these substances by bringing in established researchers and thoroughly credentialed MD PhDs, established chairs, and it's worked so far. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars that have moved into the field. Research centers have been established at UCSF, NYU, Yale, Harvard, Emory, Michigan, Texas, Berkeley. It's abroad and proliferating. I frankly, in my lifetime, never thought I would see this day. But here it is, quite magically. And that's a rewarding feeling, having spent so many years both isolated in clandestine laboratories, being punished in federal facilities for decades for the same vision, a vision which hardly can be spoken.
What a wonderful turn of events.
Well, a great hope for the next few years. We're going to learn more about these compounds in the next 2 years than has ever been known in history. At the same time, we're having tens of thousands of new related structures with similar effects being created through AI drug development, through analog syntheses by 100 different startups and new firms, lots of medicinal chemists. So we're going to see all sorts of new entities with new subjective effects. Some will have the central heart of psychedelics, the insight. Others will be more difficult and could pose new social problems. A few, but we will see that. Unfortunately, everything that appears in a journal that is psychoactive tends to be made available in the underground or on the net. And therein lies the problems.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that is yet to be discovered about what this is going to look like as more people who don't necessarily meet criteria for a research trial, but would maybe meet criteria because they have a psychiatric condition, will have access to this treatment. And, will it work? What will happen? What are some unintended consequences that might come around? I think all of these things are really worth exploring.
Absolutely. We can speak a little bit on what's unanticipated. There's a great division right now in the research community over, do we really need in the long night of the soul that psychedelics produce? See the sunrise even through 10,000 years of changes in 6 hours. Do we need that long night of the soul for these effects on depression? Or can somehow the hallucinatory, if you will, aspect be separated? The chemical modifications that leave the healing component, but allow one to sort of take a pill and go to bed and wake up somehow changed. There's a lot of funding going into that. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is very interested in this area because they don't want their warfighters treated for PTSD to lay down their weapons because they have some insight about let's not hurt people. So if you can take a pill that does not have a psychedelic effect but has a healing effect, then mom and pop in Iowa that are afraid of psychedelics will nevertheless benefit from a promising new medicine. My view is, being an old hippie, I tend to lean toward yes, the long night of the soul is necessary. Not to mention more fun and more memorable. But if indeed the hallucinatory effect can be divested from the healing effect, if it works, fine. If it works, either way is fine. There's intractable depression, treatment-resistant depression. It's a major world problem. People kill themselves. They have a much lesser life with these diseases. And if some medicine will help it, whatever that is, it does not have to be a psychedelic. Fine.
Yeah. I think what you're hinting at, and I think this is worth pointing out, is that we don't really have a great disease model for psychiatric conditions. I mean, if someone has heart disease, we can say, heart disease is due to the fact that someone's arteries have hardened and that there's plaque buildup, and we know what heart disease looks like. But for so many of these psychiatric conditions, we don't have a really good explanation of it. And, I think that claiming that you could get a benefit from a psychedelic without the hallucinatory thing sort of presupposes that we know what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about depression. And I think that's still really up for grabs. I mean, the DSM has an answer, But I don't know that that adequately accounts for what's going on. And so I don't know, I guess not being an old hippie, but agreeing with you, I do think that there is a spiritual component to a lot of psychological suffering. And I think that when we sort of lose the spiritual component of the psychedelics, I imagine that there's something lost in the treatment.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the spiritual component. A young person came up to me at a conference after hearing all of these hundreds of millions of dollars floating around and the bean counters arriving. They had never had these substances and really had no idea what they were dealing with. And asked me quietly, what about the sacred?
Mm.
So another person said, well, not to worry about that. These drugs speak for themselves. You may find yourself on your knees dealing with the sacred quite easily. So, yeah, I would have to agree with you. What fertile field.
Mm.
So many problems are spiritual problems. Bill, so be it. In ways, when, in the lack of a better term, the Hindu code, become God conscious, which all stains are washed away.
Mm.
The urge for alcohol, the urge for cocaine, all vanish with a sudden realization.
Well, since you've introduced it, I might as well ask. I know that we've just been talking a little bit here about AA and 12 steps and the belief of alcoholism as a spiritual ailment. And so I hope it's okay to mention your sobriety and being in the unique position of someone who supports psychedelics but doesn't use them. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that's like.
Well, it's kind of interesting. People tend to be find that unusual, I guess. Here accused of making, these planetary scale quantities of acid at the same time, not using any substance. I do use caffeine. I wrestle with caffeine as my last little devil. I find it useful for writing and getting through complicated days, but I would like to be free of it. But that's about it for the last 40 years. My last drink was 40 years ago.
Wow.
Last wine or beer or what have you. Last pot or anything. Of course, during according to the government, during exposure LSD labs for years, one is always at a microdose level on a daily basis, 1,500 micrograms. There's no type of protective garment that will prevent that. Flocculent powders will dissolve in the liquid of your eyes and sort of thing. So one is always slightly exposed, and this can go for quite a protracted period. The microdosing idea actually came from the early underground chemists who were first exposed to constant small doses like that and reported the microdosing effects.
Interesting.
I think on a personal level, I would find constant small exposure wearing, fatiguing, that sort of thing, and I don't see any pronounced beneficial effects from microdosing, but that's just a personal view, and I'm completely idiosyncratic in this, since few people have been in that situation.
Well, I did not know that you felt that way. I also sort of feel that way about microdosing, but I know it's not party line these days to.
I realize it's not party line, but I mean, we are very enthusiastic, and we have to be careful about being super enthusiastic. That occurred in the 60s as well. And that's just simply the novelty of many people coming in as mainstream. It's sort of safe to talk about it. So we can, discuss this. We can go to conferences and talk about it all day long. The internet is rich, replete with information, so it's somewhat safer in a way. And microdosing has reared its head, but on a personal level, although I don't have the stats, the clinical trials to back it up, and there are many good trials by respected people going on, I don't hold a lot of faith in the promise of microdosing. Then again, it may increase neuroplasticity and this sort of thing, hence the ability to do new habit formation, perhaps indulge in creative pursuits more aggressively. There's so much to be learned. And the beauty of it is we have 300 clinical trials going on worldwide, enormous amount of funding, thousands of PhDs, MDs, distinguished faculty doing rigorous studies and not so rigorous studies. So we're going to learn a lot. And out of this, may we have a few wonderful new medicines. If that's all that happens, fine. In the meantime, a lot of people are learning to know each other, meeting each other, welcoming each other. Barriers are being dropped. New friendships are being formed. People are beginning to love each other a little bit around the perimeters. It's kind of beautiful to see it.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly has reinvigorated my interest in my own clinical practice, being around in this moment. It's something that I, get excited talking about, and, having a CAP practice here in Taos is also really, really lovely as well too. I'm just kind of, I am excited about the outcomes that I've seen with people. But not everyone has really benefited from it. And so I think that's also an important piece, is figuring out how we can have realistic expectations and communicate those realistic expectations to the broader public. If they're thinking that this is going to be a silver bullet that's going to fix something.
No silver bullet, no panacea for all the compounds. I'm in the venture world, startups, hundreds of startups, and every conceivable possible application of psychedelics is being claimed. Obesity, marital problems, female sexual dysfunction, Asperger's, you name it, a psychedelic can fix it according to this or that startup. Generally, that's mostly not credible. I expect 90% of startups along that line to fail, but we are seeing it.
Yeah.
Seeing it, not just LSD, it's every legacy compound, 5-methoxy, DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, ibogaine, every conceivable compound is being applied. And if that's not enough, we have tens of thousands of new analogs. So I think 90% of it will go away, but I think we'll have something beautiful happening very soon.
I think that you're probably right, that 90% of it will go away, and that, I don't know. I mean, I think about my work and what I've learned as a therapist over the years, and so much of what needs to be solved is, is relational in nature, and is about, about environmental issues that are kind of going on, or your relationship with yourself. And those are things that are not easily sort of solved with just a medication. And so I do think it's going to be really helpful. And I am really excited that there are new options. Well,
I'm very happy, and to see you in your practice.
Here for everything. And that's kind of where I think I land with that.
Yes, I'm very happy to see your practice and your CAP therapy. I think one of the beautiful things I observe in the current resurgence is that there's guidance. Instead of just taking a pill and walking in the forest or by the sea and whatever happens, although there could be great learning and insight there. These days, it's more, let's go into this with some intention of healing some problem or thinking about the mechanisms of some problems. Let's have some insight. And then on the way down, we have a friend, a therapist, who is gently helping reaggregate one to the world of people. And I think that's very, very good, more gracious way of handling these substances.
I think so too. And I really have kind of come to believe that the integration is what is the true medicine of it, that figuring out how to take this exciting experience that you've had in the field, and generalizing it to your life is really what makes the lasting difference and how people are able to change. So I'm optimistic about it as well too. I just think it seems like it's going to be an exciting way to work, and I just can't wait to have some new FDA approved medications that I can
Move
use
from
with
a
people.
dissociative anesthetic to a psychedelic. I'm sure that would be a wonderful transition.
Speaking of a dissociative anesthetic, you're obviously known for your prediction of the fentanyl crisis. What safeguards do you think should be in place so that we can make sure we're not having another addiction epidemic?
Well, goodness. The good news is that people are spiritually waking enough that we can see these little beasts wander in and protect ourselves from them. We avoid taking strange pills. We have them tested to trust your dealer, that sort of thing, so we know what we're taking and the likely effects of it. At the same time, one must be extraordinarily cautious. In Europe, there are 50 different analogs of fentanyl. Some are extraordinarily potent, 4,000 times the potency of fentanyl. The variety that was used in the terrorist attack in Moscow in the theater was a gas that the Russian Oman forces injected into the theater to stop the terrorists. That's a variety of fentanyl. We've seen that on the underground market as well. So there's no end in sight to what can be done chemically. Yeah, I think we lost it. We'll have to come back in. Sorry about all this mumbling over here, dear.
No, it's lovely.
Normally we talk about prison, and she's got me into some kind of policy discussion.
So you have regular meetings with her?
No,
But you spoke before.
I know her.
Hmm.
Her boyfriend is Julia Roberts ranch hand. Really cute guy.
Her boyfriend is Julia Roberts' son.
Ranch hand.
Ranch. Shorter.
What to do with this?